There's always something that's thrown me about recruiting. Now, okay, I'm in a funny spot, right? I'm living in a world where I sit next to recruiters. I'm in recruiting teams a lot. I interact with a lot of recruiters. I even have lots of recruiter friends, if you can believe it. Um, but I'm not a recruiter. I've never owned a requisition. And I know that makes me kind of like an outsider in that space. I get that. But being an outsider has its advantages. I can see things that the insiders can't. They're too close to it, right? The old joke, you can't read your label from inside the jar. Well, I'm standing half outside the jar and I can kind of see what's going on. And what I've seen is this. This is not just one isolated case. This is something that I've seen over and over again in big companies, in small companies, in large recruiting teams, in small recruiting teams. And it's this: the idea that the recruiter treats each requisition like a transaction. All they got to do is get this thing over the finish line. And when they finally close that one deal, when someone finally accepts the offer and signs the paperwork and they go, whew, I'm done. Why? You got 30 more recs there, friend. There's no done. That's just one piece of it. That's like a marathoner going, whoo, I finished a mile. Yeah, okay, good. That's good. That's a piece of the puzzle, certainly. But don't feel good about yourself just because you completed a mile. You got 25 more to go, right? This is a longer game. And recruiters, I don't blame them for feeling like this. I get where this comes from. I get how all this technology and processes and expectations are put upon them that close this deal a certain way. And honestly, you just want to push it across the finish line. The problem is that that's the recipe for burnout for recruiters, for hiring managers, for candidates. Let's be fair, candidates are not thrilled with this process either. And that's why we need to look at recruiting not as a series of transactions, a way of saying, hey, let's just close this deal, let's put the butt in the seat, but instead say, look, hiring is like breathing in a company. And a good company is always breathing in and always breathing out. You're letting in great people and they're letting out the people who didn't quite fit. And every breath is an opportunity to grow the company, to upgrade the person who is leaving, to bring in more skills, to bring in better experience, to bring in people who are better aligned to do what the company is trying to do the way the company is trying to do it. I don't take a breath and go, whew, I did a breath. Breathing is just perpetual. It's something I'm always doing. And to me, in my body, breathing is just a system. It's something that is always moving, whether I'm thinking about it or not, whether I'm awake, whether I'm asleep, I am always breathing. And companies should be thinking about talent acquisition the same way, not as a series of tiny transactions, but as a system that is perpetually attracting the right people, giving them the information they need, feeding them in a process that they know is going to be straightforward for both the recruiters and the hiring managers and the candidates, so that it doesn't feel like you're an exhausted runner crossing the finish line every single time. It's time to start thinking about recruiting as a system. That is the transformation from transaction to systems. Let me kind of diagnose the situation a little bit, or at least kind of show you what I saw that made me first think of this thing. There was a recruiter who was just pushing, and I had seen them for the last 3 days. They had spent 80% of their time on this requisition. They had plenty of other requisitions in their pocket. They had plenty of other work to do, but this one had become a problem. And too many hiring managers and executives and leaders were kind of focused on this. And everybody seemed to have an opinion. And of course, as a recruiter, you don't always get to have an opinion, or at least you can't always share that opinion. And you're just forced to kind of facilitate this process, and you're just trying to push it through. So I looked a little deeper at the problem, and I noticed that the job posting was 80% written from scratch. Yes, they grabbed the company boilerplate, and one or two bullets that they seemed to use over and over again. I think they were values. And everything else they had to write from a clean sheet of paper. And then I went, well, that's really strange. You know what the job posting is going to be. This isn't a brand new job that you've never hired for before. This isn't a brand new job the company's never seen before. And even if it was, it's still going to be 60, 70, 80% similar to something else. Why are we starting from such a clean sheet of paper? And then I looked at the intake notes and I was stunned. And then I realized what was going on. I realized that, well, the intake notes had a couple of base standard questions that you could use for every hiring manager. But after that, the hiring manager was driving. The hiring manager. Why is the hiring manager driving this process? They have a day job. They have other things to do. They're very valuable to the company. If you think the hiring manager and the recruiter are there to hire the person, who's got more experience about the talent market? Who's got more experience about the ATS? Who's got more experience about how people look for jobs and find jobs and consider jobs? It's the recruiter. Shouldn't the recruiter be driving this? And because the recruiter's not driving this, the hiring manager was driving this. The recruiter had no control. They were like a passenger in the car, and the hiring manager is driving like a crazy person because they don't know where the roads are and they don't know where they're going necessarily. They have a sense of where the North Star is, but that's all gas, no brakes, just driving around like a crazy person. And the recruiter's stuck in the passenger seat going, oh God, whoa, what's happening now? And all they can do is chase the process and chase the hiring manager like a cat chasing after a laser pointer. And it's not just the intake notes, and it's not just the job postings. It's the hiring manager demanding, how many candidates have we gotten? What's going on here? And having to spend all this time on those ad hoc emails. And then once you have the job, okay, well, what should we do to reach out to people to get them excited about the job? Was there a template? No. They either had to use the standard stuff that LinkedIn suggested, or they had to make something up from scratch. And trust me, neither answer is appropriate here, because the only system in place was what the ATS said it had to be. And let's be fair, that's dicey at best. The recruiter didn't have a structure. They didn't have a system they couldn't put in place. There was no standard process. They couldn't dictate the process to the hiring manager. They couldn't be seen as the expert and mandate that process be followed. And so consequently, recruiting gets broken up into a series of a million little transactions, and each one seems brand new. Now, times that by however many requisitions you got in your pocket, and you understand why recruiters are exhausted. And I'm going to tell you right now, they shouldn't be. This is crazy. The best recruiters I've found understand a world with reusable systems, reusable processes. Let's be fair. Hiring should be customizable. It should feel customizable to the person, to the candidate, to the role, to the hiring manager, but it shouldn't be made up as you go along. Anything that's ad hoc is a failure, to be perfectly honest. Great recruiters don't make it up as they go along. Great recruiters understand that there are a series of mandated, expected milestones that every requisition goes through. That there needs to be an outreach section, that there needs to be an intake section, that there needs to be regular communication to the hiring manager, regular communication to the candidates, a process, a series of criteria by which you filter good candidates so the recruiter isn't just running fishing expeditions, right? And saying, do you like these people? No. Okay, what about these people? No. What about these people, right? No one wants that. Good recruiters understand that there are things that every job has to have, and they plan for them. They don't act like it's brand new every single time. They know that for every requisition, they need to write not only a job posting, but outreach messages, social content, how to ask the hiring manager for content to make sure that their networks are aware for it, how to make sure that the hiring manager's team knows that there is a referral bonus and what the referral bonus looks like and how to refer someone for that. The great recruiters have candidates in their back pockets, in their pipelines that they've kind of nurtured over time to say, this might be a good one for you. Heck, the best leverage their pipeline, not to say, do you want this job, but to say, help me talk about this job and help me identify who would be perfect for this job. They're actually co-opting these not candidates to help them find perfect candidates. Great recruiters don't act like it's happening ad hoc. Great recruiters know what to expect, know how to plan, know how to make this as predictable as possible, and communicate clearly. So when I say systems, it would be easy for me to say, you should go read a whole bunch of books on theoretical systems and how they work. Donatella Meadows has an amazing book called Thinking in Systems, and you should read that. But you're not going to do that, so I'm not going to bother suggesting it. They're great books, and if you're really super excited about it, you should do that. But instead, let's bring it down to brass tacks here. Let's think about systems in a way that I imagine makes perfect sense to you. We're going to think about it in terms of building a recruiting operating system. Now, you know what an operating system is on your computer. It's the thing that makes your computer does what it does, right? It's the reason why a Mac and a PC are different. It's not just the hardware, because, you're not really touching the guts of the hardware very often, but you understand that when you double click something, what to expect. You understand where your files are stored. You understand where the tools are. Do you work on a series of folders, or do you work on a million kind of tools on your desktop? That's decisions made by the operating system. So what would a recruiting operating system look like? Something where a lot of the root decisions are pre-made and predetermined by you and your team so that you can make the best decisions in the moment. Okay, we'll start with intake. Intake is the core of everything you do. Without good intake, you're kind of up the creek. And I may have said before, calling it intake does not serve you. Intake is something that an order taker does. And we'll talk more about the transformation from order taker to consultant in the next video. But for now, understand that you get to decide what you're walking into these meetings with. You can walk in with just 5 questions that you know you have to answer and let the hiring manager dictate the terms after that. Or you can come in with a 3-page set up, a form, in fact, of all the things you need to know about this job that you've figured out how to automatically pre-write or pre-draft, so the hiring manager doesn't see this big long form and go, I don't want to answer all this stuff, in which case you're at a standstill. You're at a deadlock because neither of you want to fill this form out because neither of you either doesn't want to or is equipped to do it properly. But for any job, you can go out to Google, you can go out to ChatGPT and ask it, what would a standard job like this look like? What are some requirements for a job like this? Based on what our company is doing, based on what our company talks about, and this job title, how would you expect to fill out this form? Now, it's much easier to react to a draft than it is to see a blank sheet of paper. So if you walk in having pre-filled out that intake form with a lot of detail, the hiring manager, one, is going to say, wow, this person has really put some thought into this, and they're really looking to make this a big win for everybody. And two, now you're driving or your team's driving, right? It's much easier for the hiring manager to say, well, you've got a lock on this stuff. I'm just going to adjust rather than say, oh, you got to do all these things. Start by understanding what a great intake form is. Step 1 on that is get all your recruiters together and show your cards. What does each recruiter's intake form look like? And together you can collaborate on a perfect or a near perfect intake form, something that can be adjusted, but will suit everybody. And it allows you to get better information. Look, here's the deal. You've got a recruiter who asked this one killer question, and they're only asking that question of their hiring managers. Why can't you steal that one killer question and have every recruiter ask it of every hiring manager? If it's going to elicit a comment or a line or a headline that's going to make the right candidate go, ooh, that sounds really cool, why aren't everyone doing it? That's what collaboration and recruiting is all about, so that one good idea can propagate across the entire team. The intake is also when you start to establish what quality thresholds look like. Hey, hiring manager, if I find someone who is X and Y and Z, are they worth talking to? Put it in clear detail. Make sure everybody's on the same page and document it, because you can't just say later, oh, I thought you were looking for someone who had experience in gardening. No, you documented it. You wrote it down. You both agreed to it. It's not a contract, but certainly a shared understanding of what you're trying to do. Okay, let's talk about job postings. Now, job postings, I love job postings. Oh God, so many are so bad, but they're so critical, and you know that. A great job posting, it's shared. They get attracted. People are like, oh wow, this is a really interesting job. They let their friends know. They share it on social media, but they're hard to write or require a copywriter. But if you think in terms of systems, if you think of, well, our company is all about collaboration, or our company is all about innovation, or our company is all about whatever it's all about, why not pre-write 10 or 20 headlines around those ideas? And you know what's really nice? You can use technology to do a lot of that stuff. If you've got a copywriter, please use them first. They're fantastic, but you can bulk it out with some LLM questions. Hey, our company is all about collaboration. Here are a couple of jobs. Can you write 100 interesting headlines for these jobs? And then you get to pick the 5 or 10 that look great. Don't let the AI make decisions, but let it help you brainstorm. And when you have the modules of this is what this team talks about, or this is what this team cares about, or this is what these jobs tend to do, this is what our values are, this is what our company is all about. If you use them, not instead of here's a blank template with the company boilerplate at the bottom, instead you say here's a series of like Lego blocks, you pick the one that fits, you can make much better job postings much faster. Why wouldn't you do that? And in fact, if you know what the job title is walking into the intake meeting, why not have one drafted when you walk in? The kind of time you're saving here allows you to think more creatively. You can build a library of snippets or quotes or testimonials from people in that team or in that function and stick them in the job posting. I really don't understand why we're not putting more quotes and testimonials in the job postings themselves. They're not legal documents. They're commercials. Treat them like commercials. When you're not having to write them from scratch, you get the time to think creatively on what would make that job posting more attractive. And that's where the real win is. Qualifications, thresholds, what is worth hiring, what's worth talking about at each stage of the game. Write it down. document what a recruiter qualified lead and a hiring manager qualified lead might look like. Have the conversation during the intake meeting. Get clarity at the top. Don't figure it out as you go. And as you get that clarity for that role with that hiring manager, don't throw it away when the job gets closed. Maintain that. If you get 4 or 5 of these kind of threshold documents for one hiring manager, you can actually use that to guess what that hiring manager wants in the next role. You're actually learning about how the hiring manager sees talent, what they're looking for, how they judge it. And you can use that in a tool set or an LLM to kind of define what they might be looking for next. You can anticipate their need, thus reinforcing that you are an expert here. Content strategy. Look, you probably have a series of Canva templates that you use over and over again, and I'm not going to tell you not to because you're going to anyway. However, that's not the only kind of resource you have available. During the intake meeting, now that you've done all this prep work and drafted everything and you used all the tools at your disposal to walk into that meeting to blow your hiring manager's mind away, to just make them go, wow, this person's a pro. Then you say, great, will you commit to making 2 videos and writing 3 social media posts? And if you need help writing 3 social media posts, I can help. And if you need prompts on what those videos should say, I can help. But will you commit to making them and posting them on social media and promoting them with your team and promoting them with your network? What hiring manager says no to that? What hiring manager says, no, I'll let you do all my work to find my best new hire. When you walk in with all this work done and show that you're a professional, you gain the trust of the hiring manager. That is its own operating system. When you build trust, they trust you with more. They trust you to do more. They trust you to be more involved and add to that trust. That is where the win is. So if you've got that kind of trust, think about what kind of content could you build? Hey, hiring manager, would you let me interview one of your team members for 5 minutes or have them answer these 5 questions on a voice memo function on their phone and let me kind of just find quotes I can use? This is when you get the hiring manager to commit more of the business to hiring success. And when more of the business is invested in your success, you win. We talked last time about pipelines. Pipelines are necessary here. Pipelines allow you to do so much smart thinking in advance of needing a thing. That's the biggest problem with recruiting. We always seem to need things just in time, just at the last second. We're always running around to write a job post or a social media post or put together an intake meeting or put together our notes or put together a report for the hiring manager who just kind of walked by our desk and said, I need an update. If we plan ahead and if we build systems, we can think more clearly, more cleverly about what we want to say, who we want to say it to, how we want to share this information in advance when we're not on fire, right? That is the challenge. Building a system says we're going to put the fire out so we can plan to make sure no fires ever occur. And if there is a fire, we all work in concert to put it out together faster and more effectively. That's how systems thinking works. So definitely leverage all your campaign thinking and your CRM and your pipeline thinking, but don't just generate content to generate it. Take the space that you're creating for yourself and think, what would I as a candidate want to know here? Who would I want to hear from? What would be the most interesting or surprising or exciting or useful piece of content at this stage? That's what kind of building an operating system allows you to do. Instead of running from fire to fire, you're thinking, what keeps causing these fires and how do I make sure they never happen again? And this kind of sets the stage for an enablement system, right? Where you start to document what the common objections are, what the common talk points are, what people say, how people push back. Look, the thing is, you've got a lot of great recruiters, and each and every one of them has some sort of superpower. One of them has figured out the objection to the, I don't think you're paying enough. I need more money than this. And they've got a killer answer for that. They've got a killer way to kind of reframe the challenge in the candidate's mind. But you haven't figured out how to pull that answer out, clone it amongst all your recruiters, making each one more effective. That's what enablement's all about. It's not, here, I'm going to pile a bunch of stuff on you and say, go be better. It's about learning from one another so you can each steal good answers, steal good ideas, and each become better. And to really make that enablement system take off, start with better meetings. Your weekly meetings. I know you're having a weekly meeting, but are your weekly meetings half of the team kind of showing off that they've got these amazing requisitions or they close these amazing requisitions? They're just kind of showing off how great they are and waiting for the pat on the shoulder. And the other half are going, I have all these problems and no one seems to want to help me. And it's sad. These meetings are never any fun. Go look at your sales team. They're parties. They're exciting. They're wonderful adventures. They're ways of pumping each other up and getting people excited to do great work, sharing ideas, brainstorming on the spot, making room for crazy ideas that might actually spark a really, really good idea. That's what your meeting should feel like. More of a party, more of a way of getting all the recruiters on the same page to get excited to do great work. To feel like if they're having a challenge, don't mope around, don't complain about it, but say, can someone help me come up with a killer line for this job posting or this outreach message that helps me fill this role? Can someone help me communicate to my hiring manager that we've exhausted our resources and now we have to start from scratch and we have to make these changes? Those things, there's wisdom in crowds. Leverage that crowd. You've got a great team, but right now you're keeping them in boxes because they don't feel like they can open up. They don't feel like they can share. And honestly, that's on the leadership to kind of build that culture, to build a space. And it starts usually with that weekly meeting. Make it exciting. Make it feel like you're all in it together, that the company's behind you so that you can do great work. Now, you may have noticed at this stage, I haven't recommended any technology. I mean, short of ChatGPT and Claude and LLMs like that, where you're using to kind of help brainstorm things, that stuff you probably have already, whether it's Gemini or whatever, you've got it on hand. So I'm not talking about go buy a brand new tech stack. That's not what we're talking about here. The truth is, thinking in systems is going to leverage technology and it's going to help you leverage technology better, but it starts by understanding what are the systems you can build now that get augmented by technology once you've mastered those systems. Right now, we've got it backwards. Right now, we're buying the technology to tell us what should our systems be. That's no way to live. That's not how we want to be. That's how we look like everybody else, because that's how everybody else is doing it, because everybody else is using those same tools. We start by understanding what are we trying to achieve? How are we going to achieve it together? Putting the technology aside, how do our recruiters, our relationships, our hiring managers, our companies, our leaders, how can they help us understand what we're looking for in a company? How to talk about it, how to communicate, how to build a library of quotes, how to embed those quotes in every touch point that we do, how to make sure we have a steady campaign on both the corporate social media and on individual recruiters and hiring managers' social media. How do we feed those beasts on a regular basis, not with pablum and AI slop and more we're hiring stuff that doesn't really work, but instead that supports our larger sense of what the company stands for, what the company is offering people. That's not technology. That's just thinking. That's you and the team thinking, how can we make this happen? So what I want you to think first off is what a minimal viable system would look like, a minimum ROS, a minimum recruiting operating system. How would that work in your company? Now, here's a couple of ideas. You don't have to do all of them, but why wouldn't you? First, start by making a folder. Call it recruiting operating system and put all your content in. Tell every recruiter that is where all your good ideas are going to be. You can subdivide it. You can have good ideas. You can have define ideas. You can have standard operating procedures. Like have those 3 folders so you can say, look, pitch me ideas every day, every week, or stick them in the folder and we'll review them as a team to say, how would we make this work? And if it's a good idea, we'll stick them in the next folder and we'll figure out how to make it real. What would it look like if every recruiter did it? What would we need from hiring managers? What is the pushback we're going to get from other people? How do we make sure this isn't just a nice one-off idea, but something we build every day and use every day? And once you've defined all that, you can move that great idea over to the standard operating procedures bucket and say, this is how we do things around here. Share that folder, not just with your hiring managers so they see that we've documented processes, but for every incoming recruiter. This is how we do things around here. And once you master these, then you can suggest really good ideas to help make us better. Start with the intake brief. It is the spark that starts the fire, the good fire, not the fires you are desperate to put out, but the bigger fire of making change happen at your company. Come together as a team. What does a great intake form look like? What is content you can pre-fill out? How would you fill it out better? What are some good prompts you could use in LLMs to generate that content? Test those prompts. Here's a good trick. If you've got this situation, ask the LLM to write the prompt to achieve what you want it to achieve. They write better prompts than we do. This makes some sense. And that doesn't cost you anything. It costs you maybe 30 seconds while it writes it. And then you can test them to see which prompt is generating the best content for you and make that part of the standard operating procedure. You can put those prompts for each one of those questions in the intake form so that when the recruiter starts a new requisition, they pull a blank copy of the form, they can actually take the title, take the team, stick it in each prompt, run it, copy, paste it, and they're off to the races and they look like an expert. Look, I've managed job posting libraries before, and asking you to do it is asking you to put your arms around a bear. It is not easy. However, with LLMs and AI, it is getting easier every single day. You can make a big folder, and literally, if you have 100 different job postings from 100 different teams and 100 different recs spanning the last year, you can literally give that to the LLM and say, based on how we've written all of our past job postings, write a clever and creative job posting for this title with this new information, and let it write some of this stuff. You're going to need to double check it. Absolutely. You're going to test it to make sure it sounds right. You might even say, okay, we don't use that word, or we like to. There's lots of ways to vet it, but why not use these tools to make better content, not just faster content? Look, right now you've got a CRM, you've got some sort of tool for your pipeline. Probably. If you don't, well, there's lots of easy ways of doing it. You've got a Google spreadsheet. You've got to get a copy of Notion or something, right? You can manage these things fairly straightforward, provided you don't expect every bell and whistle. But you start by starting. Recruiter qualified leads. Creating those definitions is not going to be easy, and you are going to make all sorts of missteps along the way. That's okay. If you have, and you know what, I'm going to say this. I know that you've got 2 or 3 hiring managers who really like you, who are always happy to try new things, who are always thrilled to support you, who you've always done great by and will always do great by you. Make them your kind of focus group. Set up at lunch, explain what you're trying to do, and say, look, how would you define a qualified lead for any of your roles? And how would we structure that kind of idea so it might apply to almost any role? Not that this little lunch of 2 hiring managers and a couple of recruiters is going to define every qualified lead for every company, but how do you approach this challenge? Because this is about building something the hiring manager goes, oh, this is speaking my language. This is here to help me. This is here to help me get the best possible candidate, not to help the recruiter. I mean, absolutely, it helps the recruiter, obviously, but you want the hiring manager who is faced with this new process to go, oh, I see how this helps me. I see how this serves me. And it starts by bringing in your hiring managers and asking them, how would you write this? What would you want in your circumstances? And thinking clearly through what that process might look like. Look, once you get on that kind of process, I know you're going to think about better intake meetings and better conversations and interviews and all sorts of other stuff. But the one thing I want you to think about is that weekly meeting. How do you get your team to see the rest of the team as a huge resource to making their own work better? I'm not saying you figure out a president's club and you promise to send them to Tahiti. I know that you don't have that ability just yet, but if you get them excited about this process, that they're going to learn from one another, that they're going to expand their repertoire and build tools for themselves to become and perform at a way higher level to show the company how incredibly valuable they are, that's not just going to happen. That's something you have to push the boulder on. That is something you are going to have to work extra hard as the leader to make happen, to instill and implement and really install as a regular thing. So don't think you're flipping a switch here. This isn't something you just up and do, but it is a North Star you focus on. And anytime you're in a weekly meeting and someone goes, woe is me, or someone goes, everybody look how great I am, you got to learn how to shut that down nicely and readjust and bring them back to the sense that we are here to help each other perform way better than we ever could by ourselves. Look, I know this is a big change to ask of you. It's a big change to ask of anybody, but you're going to be a little skeptical. I know, because I've seen it work, that this is a process that makes change happen, and this makes the lives of recruiters better. However, you won't believe it till you see it, and I get that. I get that. So here's what you should be doing while you're implementing this change. Here are the things to be looking for to show you that it's really working. The first is, when you walk into intake meetings without blank pages, with better thought processes, you will start to see the hiring manager shift their tone. not as demanding. They're more peers. They're more working with you, not dictating terms. You're also going to notice fewer status pings. That to me is like the litmus test. When the recruiter trusts that you know what you're doing, that you've got your eye on the ball, that you understand what they need, hands off. They're not going to worry nearly as much. And by the way, part of that enablement process is to build a system where you're regularly pinging the hiring manager with status updates, whether it's daily or 3 times a week or whatever they think they need. You're going to build that into your own system, in each recruiter systems, so they're proactively communicating to the hiring manager what's going on instead of waiting for the hiring manager to come in and go, what's going on? Did you guys forget about me? That's how you're going to notice. I'm saving the rest of this big transformation for the next video because the truth is, when you embrace systems, the natural change that you're going to see is in moving from a order taker to an expert, because you want your recruiters to be experts. And frankly, your recruiters want to be experts. They want to be consultants. They don't want to be pushed around. They don't want to be told what to do. They are exhausted in this model. But the transformation of moving from order taker to consultant also isn't a switch you can flip. It isn't a light switch. It isn't something easy to do. It happens because you're changing the foundation of what the recruiter hiring manager relationship looks like. And you do that by stopping thinking of all recruiting and every requisition as a transaction and starting to think of them as systems that you support, you grow, you develop, you nurture, you embed for everyone. I can't wait to talk to you next time, the next video about changing and making that transformation from order taker to consultant, because that's my favorite. But I'll see you there.